The bill is set down for committee stage next sitting day. Call on order of the day, Government Order of the Day number 6.
New Zealand Horticulture Export Authority Amendment Bill interrupted debate on second reading.
Members, the last time this matter was being debated, Barry Coates had the call. He's 8 minutes remaining to speak.
Speaker.
I call Megan Woods.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's my pleasure to take a call on this piece of legislation that Labor is supporting. And Mr. Speaker, this is a piece of legislation that amends a 1987 piece of legislation that was brought in by the then Labor government. What it does is it makes this legislation fit for purpose for the 21st century and does a number of minor amendments that nonetheless do make it more modern and forward-facing. The piece of legislation that was brought in 1987 was quite groundbreaking in itself. It developed a system and a set of rules whereby a group of growers of various horticultural products could come together and agree on a strategy. They could come together and agree on how they were going to act and how they were going to operate in particular markets, and then what they were empowered to do under this 1987 legislation was to do something that is only usually reserved for Parliament, and that was to effectively tax. It was to issue a levy so that there was some resources that allowed grower groups to go in and do market development. And Mr. Speaker, we can look at the evidence that in 1988, around the time the legislation was put into place, that New Zealand had approximately $50 million worth of horticultural exports going out around the world. Last year, Mr. Speaker, in 2015, that figure was $300 million. And the horticultural sector, of course, has ambition to get that even higher. Now, Mr. Speaker, to date there are 9 horticultural groups that have placed themselves under the regime that is governed by this piece of legislation, and around 54 exporters. But what this amendment does is bring the legislation up to speed to realise that actually we might need our horticultural groups to develop more nuanced strategies, that it might need to be a little bit more geographically specific, and the products may need to be differentiated into different markets. It may be for entry into some of the high-value Asian markets that are emphasising the health benefits of particular cultivars and particular varietals of particular horticultural products will be the best way to achieve premium for those exporters. Or it may be that it's more of a commodity strategy in other markets. And this does allow grower groups to move beyond a one-size-fits-all strategy and be much more flexible and much more able to maximise what it is that they can get as a return for their products in that market. It also, Mr. Speaker, clarifies the requirements that are imposed on these product groups to enter into or exit from the export framework established by the Act. And Mr. Speaker, having these rules crystal clear is obviously really important when we are giving the authority through a piece of legislation to another group to effectively tax. That this is quite a unique ability that we're bestowing through this legislation, and that of course has to be clearly governed. And Mr. Speaker, one of the reasons for bringing the legislation in 1987 is that what we had is we had a number of operators, the single operators who were thinking about getting one shipment across a particular border and weren't thinking about developing that market and what the long-term plan for either that product or that market was. So, and one of the ideas in the legislation was to put the rules around that, and what this legislation does is bring up the penalty system that is contained under the authority to make it so that anyone who does flout the rules, that anyone that doesn't act in the best interests of New Zealand Inc., that doesn't act in the best interests of a particular product group and the particular market development opportunity that exists for a particular product, that they actually do get the penalties that are there. What we also see is that there is the ability for information sharing that is established under this Act, thank you very much, and that information sharing between the authority so that being the Horticultural Export Authority and the Ministry for Primary Industry and New Zealand's Customs Services. Now, in many ways this makes sense, Mr Speaker, no one is disputing that. But what we have to do is have good rules around the formalisation of that information sharing between the authority and the various other agencies, so that we can make sure that we do have the right groups to, that we do have the right rules that govern that and don't put anything at risk. Mr Speaker, what we do need to do is make sure that we are always looking for ways to develop the ways for us to get premium for our products in export markets. Our horticultural products are seen around the world as premium in many instances. We have many examples that we can point to where we've seen these collective efforts that have gone in and not only developed particular markets, but done it around particular products. And no greater example can exist than Zespri. That Zespri has not only developed the story around the kiwi fruit, but also through the fact of acting collectively as a group, has invested very heavily in research and development as well. The fact that this was a grower group that was well poised to respond to the PSA virus when it attacked the kiwi fruit plant, in no small part had credit to the fact that there was a very large germplasm that could be looked back on to see what remedies that lay within other cultivars and other types of plants that were there that could be more responsive to that. So, Mr Speaker, what we see is that when we do have industries that work in a collective manner, when we have industries that band together and develop not only collective R&D strategies that are around industry good and invest in the public good science that lies behind that, but we also have industry groups that are faced on putting together market strategies and market entry strategies, which are vitally important for our horticultural products, that we do see the kind of growth that we've seen since the establishment of this authority in 1987, Mr Speaker, from that $50 million to $300 million. It does need updating. We do need the ability for our grower groups to have the flexibility to respond differently around different products and in different markets, and I think that is something that we fully support, and it is the reason that Labor is supporting this piece of legislation, Mr Speaker.